It is my pleasure to be presenting Stephon Gillom, who is 30 years old. I'm saying he's 30 years old because today's his birthday. And Stephon holds a BS in political science, pre-law, from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, an MA in peace building and conflict transformation from the School of International Training, and is currently pursuing his PhD in marriage and family therapy from Antioch University, New England. He also holds a certificate in TESOL, T-E-S-O-L, teaching English to speakers of other languages from Centro Espiral Mana in Costa Rica, and a 30-hour mediation certification from the School for International Training. He spends his time working as a marriage and family therapist, a conflict resolution specialist, a professional mediator, a diversity consultant, TESOL educator, conference trainer, commentator on VPR, Vermont Public Radio, and is president of the Windham County, Vermont branch of the NAACP. Most recently, he was appointed to the Governor's Equity Task Force, and with his spare time, he also sits on several other committee and advisory boards. It's my pleasure to present Stephon Gillom.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I never quite get used to Zoom and all of the buttons, especially now since we've got this fancy account that I'm using. It's got even more buttons. Yeah, so I'm happy to be here today. And they told me that I had, of course, someone starts calling me when I start talking. They told me that I had about 20 minutes with you all, so I didn't want to spend much time actually talking at you. I kind of wanted to spend more time having a bit of a conversation. But with that being said, I did just want to, give you a short update about, some things that, let me get into the better light. There we go. Some things that, we're doing as a branch, and tell you a little bit about the NAACP. Just to get a quick show of hands, how many of you have heard about the NAACP before or heard of it? Okay. You will be surprised how many people in Vermont have not heard about the NAACP or interacted with it. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just shows, how states interact and exposure and lack of exposure to things. So the reason I mention that is because, and it wasn't until about 2015 that the NAACP had even made its way to Vermont, even though the NAACP has been around since 1909 and was in most other states, pretty much all of the other states, even Maine, since the 1950s or 40s or 60s, or you just pick an era and they've been around. Most branches are pretty old or are younger, which in the NAACP, anything like 55 and younger is very young. but they're younger. So it was originally created, a lot of people don't know this either, it was originally created in collaboration between Black people and white allies. And those people were W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Mary White Ovington, Henry Markowitz, and let me see, I wrote down the other ones too. William English Welling, Lillian Wald, Oswald Gerald Villard, I always mess his name up every time, and Archibald Grimke. And most of the people on there actually were white allies. Obviously, Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois are the two big names that we all know and respect a lot today. And I would also say Mary White Ovington is also pretty well known as well. And so the NAACP has always had this philosophy of working hand in hand, between our communities to really promote civil rights. And they usually work and have always worked structurally. There was a bigger grassroots component back in the 60s and 50s and 40s and even a little bit in the 80s, but that kind of has gone down as other groups have come up, like Black Lives Matter, for example, and just a plethora of other grassroots style groups. So we are still grassroots in a way, but we really take more of a structural approach to things. So with that being said, we do have 6 game changers that we operate through. Those game changers are economic sustainability, education, health, public safety, and criminal justice, which is one, one by itself, voting rights and political representation, and we just added a new one, youth and adult engagement. So with that being said, our branch was founded in 2018, and thanks for the shout out, Carla, it's good to see you. And it actually started sort of off of the SIT campus. I mean, there were other folks in town who were doing stuff, but SIT alumni were some of the original founding members. To start a branch, by the way, it takes 100 founding members, and they'll have to pay into the branch. And so it's not an easy feat by any means to start a branch. But since we've started, we've been pretty successful. We've gotten quite a bit done in the community. So I'm not going to go through the exhaustive list around exactly what we've done because we'd be here for a while, but I could just give you a little update about a couple of our current initiatives that we've got going on. So locally, we, in the midst of COVID, said, whoa, we've got a big problem here. We aren't testing accurately. You know, a lot of things are falling through the loopholes, but as a state, we're doing pretty well, right? I mean, according to the news and things like that. And I think it's because of organizations like the NAACP. So for what do we do, you ask? Well, our organization in collaboration with the CEC, which I think some of you probably know about, it's really, it just means the Community Equity Collaborative, got together and said, okay, we need to compile is a loose term. We need to bring together a group of doctors and people in the medical profession, and we need to figure out what are the gaps, what's going on, you know, down here on the ground for us. And at that time, I was already on a board, well, not a board, a committee, I should call it, for equity with the hospital that was sort of doing the same work, but they had just started. And so we brought those groups together and we figured out what forms weren't working, what was going wrong, where, you know, what questions weren't being asked, and we started shooting it up to the state level. Well, since I sit on the equity committee for the governor, it was pretty easy to do that, which is what I mean by structural approach. We take a structural approach in that we are on the ground, but we're also, you know, doing a lot of state level stuff as well, and it's easy to connect those things. So we wrote a couple letters, and it was pretty easy for us to get the Vermont Department of Health to start collecting data around race, which it was not doing before. That was really helpful to look at disparities, and lo and behold, just like every other state, Vermont was not unique in that people of color were higher in their COVID contraction, and areas where folks of color lived were also heavily impacted. For example, Winooski area up in Chittenden County. So that was one thing we did, and we connected it to the state level as well. We also do a lot of things around acts of hate. I'm sure a lot of you have seen, you know, the graffiti that's been passed around, you know, all over the county. We've been doing a lot trying to combat those acts of hate. You know, in Putney, we just commissioned a mural. We haven't gotten it yet, but we think we're going to get it. People seem pretty excited about it. That showed up to the select board meeting. And we also advocated to have a equity committee put onto the Putney Select Board. Now what this does, well, we advocated to give it powers. We didn't advocate to get it put on. We advocated to give it powers to review police contracts. So what that does is it kind of takes some of that power around who's policing and how we're doing it and puts it into the hands of the people because these are all citizens that are on this board, and they get to look at the contracts and say, is this right for us? How does this work for us? And as that goes along, like, should this contract be reviewed, right? Which is how policing, in my opinion, should be. The citizens should have a big hand in what their community policing looks like, and how much money is being spent on that, in regard to other things. Another thing that we've been dealing with is the Negro Brook situation. So that was brought to us by two community members out of the Townsend area. And it's just simple. It's just a simple ask. They wanted to rename the brook, called Negro Brook, after someone who was Black, who worked the land in their community. So right now we're pushing pretty hard to get that done. On the state level, we've advocated for a plethora of bills, and we've been pretty successful in helping some of them get passed through, or at least, heard much more about by people here in Windham County. We do that by sending out emails and stuff like that, but I can give you a couple of the names. Oh, wait, I just lost my thing. But anyway, I can remember a lot of them. They pretty much were bills that were focused on community-based policing, the establishment of a task force to look at reparations. And we did that through collaboration with a plethora of other groups statewide. And that's just a task force to look at what that would even look like for a state, right? Like, what does reparations even mean? So that's really what that is. We also have done a lot around use of force, and looking at use of force laws within policing, trying to get uniformity there, because everyone's just kind of doing their own thing when it comes to a lot of these policies. And that can be scary, especially for people driving back and forth throughout the community. So with that being said, I can give you a lot more information on that, but that's just a little snapshot of some things that we've been doing, I'd say, in the last couple weeks. How to get involved? Well, if you want to get involved, there are plenty of things that you can do. One of the bigger things is that you could become a member, and then you get on our mailing list. And on our mailing list, you can become involved by joining a committee. And we have plenty of committees. We have an education committee. We have a legal redress committee. We have a policy committee, which I keep forgetting the official name of it because I hate the official name of it that the NAACP makes us have. So I just call it the policy committee. Nader Hashim, by the way, is one of our vice presidents, and he runs our legal redress committee. And so you might know him because he's our local rep, one of our local reps in Windham. Yeah, we have quite a few committees that do quite a bit of work. So, okay, now that I've given you all the spiels, I kind of wanted to kind of engage in a conversation with you all. And this can be a loose conversation. Don't feel any pressure to speak, but I do hope that we do speak a little bit. So the first question that I wanted to ask everyone was, have you ever had a negative experience with the police? And you can just raise your hand if you have. Okay. Okay, I see one hand. Now there are 23 people on the call. So if anybody's on the phone, it's for accessibility, maybe you could just unmute yourself and say yes, or I don't know if there's any other special things on Zoom. Maybe you could do 2 taps or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But anyway, okay. So that looks like maybe one person, maybe 2. I thought I saw 2 hands. Okay, 2 hands. So a friend of mine who I was part of the NAACP Next Gen program with, and the Next Gen program, by the way, is a program that brings together Black and Brown leadership from all over the country, and also white allied leadership too, to work together to not only co-collaborate what the NAACP is going to look like in the future, but also to promote civil rights through this generation, right? So the next generation of leaders. Well, anyway, one of my friends posted on Facebook the other day and said, he just asked a simple question to all of us, his friends. He said, when was the first time that you had a gun pulled on you by police? And I thought, that's a vulnerable question, but why not answer it? I mean, we're all friends here. We're on Facebook, it's a closed space for the most part. And so I said, for me, it was 25. And then all these other guys started commenting. And before I knew it, there was like 150 Black men and women and Hispanic men and women who were on there commenting. And I knew all of them. And they were saying things like 15, 16. Well, there was this time in high school with the resource officer, where, we got taken outside and there was a fight or whatever, right? All these things. For me, it was taking my cousin, who was pregnant at the time, to McDonald's. And my aunt lived down an alleyway, and there was a stop there, a seatbelt stop. And I decided, well, I don't want to do that because she lives in the alley, and the alley's right there. So I didn't go to the seatbelt stop. I just pulled over to the side, and they thought I was fleeing the scene of something and chased me, pulled me over, pulled us out of the car, and put the gun on me and ripped my floorboards apart and everything. And then, took her to jail, threw her to the floor. I guess that she had an old, what did they say it was, jaywalking ticket or something. Like, we live in a city, who doesn't jaywalk? But anyway, so it was one of those things where I just remember that traumatic moment. And so I wanted to ask all of you, for the one person who had the negative experience with the police, I think your name is Ron, did you want to share anything about it, just quickly? Uh-oh, it's like they're trying to talk, but they're not unmuting themselves.
Okay, I got it. Okay, so I was 17 years old, lived in Eastern Massachusetts, drove a car up to Hampton Beach, and had a little fender bender, and the police officer accused me of a hit and run. There was no place to park, so I had to pull the car up the street. They took me to the police substation. I don't think he pulled a gun on me, but it was pretty traumatic as a young kid. And I actually had to stay in the substation. And ironically, we had a teacher that owned the casino at Hampton Beach. And a friend of mine called him, and he got me out of jail. So that's my story.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So I wanted to ask that question because the person who put that Facebook post up I think he was just elected as the youngest ever Black man. He's still in law school, by the way. He's in law school. I think he's in L2, so he's almost done. But he was just elected as the youngest Black student ever to the Texas Bar Association. Don't quote me, but it was something very close. I can get you the details about the bar, the official name of the Bar Association. But he was like, I think the first student in history to ever be brought on as a part of the body, right? And he had a gun pulled on him, and I, as you heard, have a decent amount of credentials at this point in my life, and I had a gun pulled on me right before I came, about a year and a half before I came to. I was 20. I said I was 25. I was, well, I think about 24 and a half, because it was about half a year before I came to Vermont. Everyone who commented on that status were degreed people, successful people, my brothers and sisters in Next Gen. And it just really struck me. And so I can give you all of the who we are and what we're doing. But I think the better question is, and the more important question is, why we're here. It brought me back to a discussion that I had during my first internship with this judge. And he told me, because I'm a pre-law major, I was going to go to law school at one point, and I decided I'd rather be a therapist. But anyway, he told me, it's the only Black judge in the entire circuit that I worked in, circuit court. And he said, I see a lot of young white guys and men and women who come through here. And he said, and I see a lot of Black ones too. He was like, do you want to know the difference? I said, what is the difference? He was like, the difference is that most of the people in the white community have at least one connection. They know somebody. And what that means is that you are allowed to be a kid. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to be a human being, because we all know that that's what happens. And I think, like Ron said earlier, sometimes you just are in the wrong place at the wrong time, and people just do things that ain't right to you. He said, I have seen wealthy Black families come to my courtroom without the same structural support. He said, people think because they have money that they can get out of the situation. He said, no, they use all their money trying to get out of the situation. He told me, he said, as a young Black man, I'm going to tell you now, he said, you've done okay this far, because I was like 19. He said, I'll tell you now, you have one time to mess up. One time to mess up, and if you get in that system, it's going to be hell and high water to get you out. And that really impacted me, because I thought to myself, well, I'm also a young person. Am I not supposed to make any mistakes ever? Am I not supposed to be youthful and do dumb things? Everyone does. Actually, sometimes that makes the best leaders out of us, right? Because those are the ones who actually know some stuff, who've lived through some stuff, done some stuff. And it really brought up this discussion around humanity and who speaks for our humanity. And when I see all these young folks on the TV getting put off and into jails and being called adults and being given language being put on them that is so problematic, I think about his words. And it comes full circle to think about all of those gentlemen and women and everyone who was on that status that day commenting. And I said to myself, these are the ones who didn't make any mistakes. They got guns pulled on them too, that's just true. Some of them were from rural areas, some of them were from cities. But nonetheless, they survived the interaction, and they're here to tell about it. They didn't make any mistakes. I say the story, and I mention that story because I think that it's important to put out and to talk about why we're here. There are people in Vermont who live among us who are having the same exact experiences. And they come to places like the NAACP, and we try to help them, and we try to fight for them. The policies that we're trying to pass, the laws that we are pushing lawmakers to reform, even something as simple as a mural, is to combat these stereotypes, is to combat this dominant discourse, this narrative being put on the backs of Black and brown people everywhere. It's so fascinating to me to hear and to see the differences in perspective around experience with police between my white colleagues and my colleagues of color here in Vermont. I speak about myself a lot because it's the easiest thing to do. When I first moved over to, right near downtown, sort of around the Clark Street area, I was pulled over 5 times in 1 year. Eventually I called, I said, hey, I'm with the NAACP, so pulling me over. But it was one of those things where I said to myself, every time that happened, I thought about that judge and his words, and I said, okay, I can't make a mistake. I have to be right. I have to do right here. And that meant being calm, taking the disrespect, not saying anything back to the very condescending remarks, even though I was much more educated than the people who were making them, and not dying, essentially. And I think about that, and I think about those judges' words, and I say to myself, damn, one mistake, and all this stuff could have been for nothing. So anyway, that's kind of what I bring to this space today. And I know we don't have that much more time left. I don't know how much time he gave me. He said 12:40, but it's just now 12:40. So I don't know, y'all are running fast today. But I was hoping that we could sort of have a little bit of a conversation. And I just want to open up the floor to invite any thoughts around anything that I've said. It's not really a speech. It's just more of me coming in, being real about the situation that we're in and talking to you about it, and saying that those things are happening here in Vermont. And they're happening to people who have melanated skin. And also a lot of poor white people too. So anyway, I want to open the floor really quickly and just see if anybody has anything to say based on anything that I've said. And I guess I'll facilitate by calling names.
Ron Staley.
Okay. Oh, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, hi, Stephon. So I'm the former superintendent of schools in Wyndham Southeast, and we started a equity committee. I don't know if you know Michaela Sims.
Yes.
She's the director of our committee, and we were very successful in working with town government and churches in the area, and youth services and other agencies, and that group is still working hard. I wonder if you do anything, do you work with that group at all, or have you ever sat in on that group's meetings?
Yes, so we have not worked with them super closely, but we have sat on their meetings. We have gone to the school board meetings and supported initiatives that they have put forth. There was just an initiative, and I can't remember the exact name of it. It was, I think, put forth a couple weeks ago, maybe three weeks ago or so, and we went and we asked that it be passed. It was around looking at the structural, the entire structure of the Wyndham School District, and trying to figure out where the gaps were and what could be done. But I think this is the first time that that's been done the way that they were proposing it. And so we went and we asked for that to happen. Another thing that we did with the school was we weighed in on the rubber tarp thing. Yeah, with the and we thought it was important to say something about that because we have an environmental arm to our national office, and so it was important to just weigh in and say, well, these are the potential risk factors if this is created, and so this is why we feel like maybe we should hold off until we know a little bit more, because students have been harmed by these before, but at the same time, it would look pretty.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, this is where we're at with it.
Yeah. Well,
those have been our two most previous encounters.
Yeah. Well, I'm really pleased to hear. I've heard some great things about you, and I'm really pleased that you're working in Brattleboro, Wyndham County, and I hope you're able to continue doing more with the schools. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate that. We have an education committee, and our education chair's name is Cliff Wood. He was the president of one of the SUNY colleges for 40 years before he came to Vermont. And so he's been a great chair, and he's done a lot of stuff for the diversity days in schools and everything like that. So yeah, we're doing good work with the education committee. We also work pretty heavily with Landmark College.
Great.
And actually, Mark Thurman, now that I'm thinking about it, was just elected as our new education chair. And he is from Jersey, and he is a man of color. He is the diversity coordinator out at Landmark College.
Oh, great. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Is there any other just general comments?
Stephon, I have a question. Why did it take over 100 years to open up a chapter in Vermont?
Well, so that's a good question that I don't necessarily know the answer to, but I can tell you from my experience that Vermont is the only state, even outside of Maine, which I think is actually whiter than our state, that does not have a strong Black infrastructure. And when I say Black, I use that term actually pretty widely because usually Black infrastructure begets Hispanic and Asian infrastructure too. Because if you have 100, like a group, like for example, if you have a group called Links, which is predominantly for Black women, there are also a lot of Asian and Hispanic women within Links. And they go on to create their own groups and build their own infrastructures out. So most states have a large detailing of groups like 100 Black men, 100 Black women, Links, the Divine Nine, the NAACP, which is the oldest and boldest of them all, as we claim, right? Maybe they might feel different, but Black Lives Matter, all these different entities that are there structurally to support people of color. Vermont doesn't have one of those groups. We have the ACLU, we have grassroots, like very, very grassroots groups that have been created by townsfolk who were really proactive in trying to make space. But there is nothing that has that structural power to say that even connects us to other states. One thing the NAACP has done is that it's connected our civil rights journey to that of other states because we're part of the New England region. And so all of the presidents, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, we all talk, we know each other. Not only do we know each other, I know the president of the Minneapolis branch of the NAACP, Leslie Redmond. Whenever her city was blowing up, I seen her on CNN. I was able to have conversations with her and say, what do you need from Vermont? What can we be doing here to support your initiatives? I know James Woodall down in Georgia, when we were talking about the Ahmaud Arbery cases, he was handling it, one of the ones handling it. I said, what do you need from Vermont? Okay, they need money. Do they need support, people to sign these petitions? What do we need to be doing? So we needed to get ourselves out there and be part of the civil rights narrative nationally for people to say, oh, Vermont does things there. They do exist. And because we do a lot of good work, it's just kind of on this island. And so I would say that that's the case with a lot of the other organizations too, like the fact that we don't have Links. Links is like one of the most powerful organizations for women of color in the nation. We should have Links, things like that. There's another, Roger, I think I see you now.
Thanks, Stephon. Thanks for what you're doing. I attended a session where you made a presentation. It was very good. Just a question. As you know, Vermont in its constitution was the only state that outlawed or was against segregation. In fact, at the time, Mississippi said that Vermont should be floated out into the water and sunk somewhere at the time. And as you know, Vermont wasn't allowed to become the one of the 13 original states because it was against segregation. That was the reason it was prohibited in the beginning. So that history is there, even though it didn't create an AACP chapter. I'm glad you're there now. Any reflection on that history?
I mean, right off the top of my head, I do have a little bit of reflection on it. I don't know if it's going to be the best or most coherent reflection, but I would say that the history of slavery is nuanced here in Vermont, but I do agree with you that we we weren't on board with the original big picture, enslave everybody who's Black sort of thing. The Constitution, I do believe, well, I think we just changed it, but I think that it did allow slavery until 21 or something like that. I can't remember the exact language, but I know that we had to change it because the NAACP was part of fighting to change it. And that was pretty recently, but you're right. They were one of the states, I think they were one of the only ones that didn't just go full out with it. So there's that, there's the nuance. I also think that our history of eugenics here with the indigenous community has also not painted us so well historically. So there are conversations to be had about, our conscience as a state, but I also would say that all in all, we should give ourselves some pat on the back for being proactive as we can. I think now the challenge is trying to kind of remove that island feel from our civil rights community and our civil rights work so that we can be more connected. Because one thing about Vermont is that, as you all know, it's a strong state. It's small, but it's a powerful state, and it makes a lot of progressive policy that really can help the country if folks really know about it and the right people start pushing for it in the right places. And so by extending that network, we might have people like, for example, the Minneapolis president who might have some sway in her state to look at something that's going on in Vermont and say, why can't we have that? And start pushing. So I think it's kind of a both and, right? I think we've done a great job. I also think we've messed up a whole lot along the way. I'm also thinking about it as a person who is not originally from Vermont, right? If we were asking somebody from the indigenous community, they might have a whole different point of view because of the eugenics was so bad here. But that's really those are my initial thoughts on that.
Stephon, Sherry Ann has a comment.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Stephon.
Hi.
Hi. Hi. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And thank you for the leadership that you do for us. I just want to correct you a little tiny thing. And that is, yes, you are absolutely correct that it took a long time to get a chapter here. But I've been a member of the NAACP for longer than the chapter has been here. And I'm so grateful that we finally do have a chapter. And I continue to be a member. But I just want to say in defense of us, we've just been trying to survive here. And I think that's more clear to us than it may be to everyone else. So I think that's part of the reason that we haven't had a chapter here is survival.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I actually think it speaks to the point earlier around just the infrastructure part. There was, I had a conversation with an elder. I don't actually know how old they were, but they said that they were one of the original, they were a descendant of one of the original Black families here in Vermont. And they said the same thing. It was like, it's a matter of survival. And they actually talked about the NAACP coming out of Connecticut to help them sometimes, like they had called them and things like that. So you're right. It's always been here, but I'm just glad that we're able to get some sort of infrastructure in the state. It'll be a challenge though, right? Because as we know, cabinets change. I'm the president right now. I don't know if I'm going to be the president forever. So it really will be up to the community to kind of hold it and to keep it forever, which I hope that we do. But I really do hope that this expansion out into the world a little bit more, it helps. But yeah, I would say that New England, and that might be kind of to Roger's point too, like New England has kind of created, it's like this little, I don't know what to call it. Like, I've been here for 5 years, which is a lot of my life. I'm only 30, but it's like a kind of a petri dish. And people of color really can get caught up in that and have a rough go of it. And they talk a lot about the South, but sometimes it's like, well, there's a lot of infrastructure there. So sometimes if you're a person of color, it could be actually a little bit easier because you have places to go. And here that's one of the reasons why I wanted to create it. I didn't have anywhere to go when stuff was happening to me. outside of some of the small groups that are here, and they've done really wonderful work, but you know, that's not who you look for if you're transient. And if you want folks of color to come to the state, then you have to have the infrastructure here that attracts them to the state. That's what I would say to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing your story. I did want to ask one more question. I don't know how much time I have, but 3 minutes? Oh, Jesus. Okay. Well, maybe I won't ask. Well, I'll ask it very quickly, and then I'll just wrap up. Because I really came here to have a conversation. I didn't want to just talk at y'all the whole time and give a presentation. I was like, I told him, Martin, I don't want to do that. But I wanted to ask, like, if you could just do one thing in your sphere of influence to kind of make a difference for marginalized people, you know, in context of race, maybe ability, anything like that, what would it be? And you don't feel pressure, but just if you could say one thing you could do in your own sphere of influence, right? Your own power you could think of. I see Tom, and then I see Sandy.
Hi, I've been thinking about that question for quite a long time, and it's really easy and it's not enough, but I can give money. And I know some organizations have been overwhelmed with money recently, as the protests and bail funds have gotten too embarrassingly rich. But this is a flash in the pan, and doing it over time and continuing it as I can, it's one of the benefits. It's a teeny and insignificant way for me to give back, but it's better than nothing. But the big question is, how could I make a difference? I've been struggling with that one for years, and haven't come up with any good answers yet. I'll be honest. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm lucky because I run the literary festival in town, and so what we try to do to make a difference is to invite authors of color to speak at the festival and to change people's perception of their life and to incorporate that piece into their life. What we have not been successful at is attracting audiences of color, and I'm not sure why that is. When Isabel Wilkerson was here, she spoke to an all-white audience, and I just found that stunning, that there was not a single person of color, not a single African American anyway. But we keep doing it, and it does make a difference. The local people have commented on how the festival has changed their perception of race in different ways. But mainly because, if you've lived in very white Vermont your whole life, you're not really exposed to that culture, and so it's important to get it out there. We feel anyway. That's what I'm doing.
Well, thank you for that. I wish we had a little more time to dig into that, because I think that we could bring some of what Sherry Ann, which I hope I'm not messing up your name, kind of brought into the space around that survival piece, and like what that actually means for time, and what you go to and what you don't go to, and what you might be exposed to. And I think there is a lot of events that happen that are really wonderful, but then you think, oh, who's going to be there, and what am I going to have to hear, and what are they going to say? So it's like that contextual piece. But anyway, we can dig into that more later.
Sherry Ann does come to the festival, and it is free, so it's not an economic burden for anybody. So
okay, yeah. I wish we had time to dig into that, because I love those kind of conversations. I will say before I jump off, though, that what I would suggest is that, and this is just me, the way that I think about it is like, we're part of an ecosystem, and we're in an ecosystem. What is the saying? We're the sum of all of our parts, and people of color specifically have been given a very small niche. So like, for example, the beaver cuts the tree down, that's its niche, and then it builds the dam. That's what it does in the ecosystem. People of color have been given a very small part of the ecosystem. I would say that what you could do in your time here with your structural power is to work to widen that power, widen that niche, widen their ability to move and have that mobility. That might be helping with employment opportunities, that might be giving money when that's the chance, that might be advocacy and saying, why don't we have more of this at our organization? And then when we bring people in, saying, okay, now that they're here, how do we make their stay comfortable? How do we actually keep them here, right? Not just get them here to have a face on the wall. How do we connect them to the elders in the community that have been here, that have been doing it, so they can learn, right, the contextual context of this community and integrate successfully with leadership? I think these are the things that we could be doing in our own spheres of influence, just structurally. And I think that everybody here is part of an ecosystem, because you have jobs, you have children, you've got families and networks. And I think that that is the way, really, for a group of individuals like yourself in a Rotary Club to make a big difference, and to always remember that when you see a lot of times a person of color getting a really bad deal of it, to kind of remember what that judge said to me that day, that they might be fully credentialed, they might not, who cares, honestly, but they might have just made one mistake, or they might have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that's all that might be all they got. That might be it for them. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal for a person. And so stepping in any way you can to change that. Anyway, don't mean to end soberly, but thank you so much for having me. And I think I took up all my time.
Thank you very much for spending some time with us today. That was an excellent, excellent program. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I went 4 minutes over. My clock on my computer is different than my clock on my stove. Sorry.
Well, it's not your fault. It's Sandy's fault. You asked the last question.
Thanks, Phil.
No problem. No, thanks
for
again.
having me.
That was great. So we'll adjourn the meeting the same way we started. I'll ring the cowbell, and everybody have a great week. We'll see you next week.